I'm very happy now to introduce Drew Christensen. Drew Christensen, a Jesuit, is the Distinguished Professor of Ethics and Global Development at Georgetown University's School of Foreign Service and co-director of the Program on the Church and the World at Georgetown's Berkeley Center. A former editor of America magazine and director of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops' Office of International Justice and Peace, Drew taught social ethics and peace studies at the Jesuit School of Theology and at Notre Dame. Active in ecumenical and interfaith affairs, he was a member of the first International Catholic Mennonite Dialogue, which issued the groundbreaking report Called Together to be Peacemakers. Through Drew and the Catholic Peacebuilding Network, the Berkeley Center is collaborating with Notre Dame, Boston College, the U.S. Bishops' Conference, and the Nuclear Threat Initiative on a series of programs on the ethics of the abolition of nuclear weapons. He is a highly respected theologian, a prolific author, and a frequent speaker, including at the Vatican, on ethical issues such as the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons and nuclear deterrence. Drew, thank you. It's nice to have you with us.
Marie, thank you very much for inviting me, and Pax Christi for all its work. I want to salute my co-panelists. It's good to be on with Daryl and Joan, and I'm eager to speak with the audience today. Basically, I'm going to try to focus on the Vatican's current position on the abolition of nuclear weapons and try to show the lines of that more recent development and the background thinking behind the Vatican's push for abolition of nuclear weapons. Let me begin with a quote from Pope Francis to the Vienna Conference on Humanitarian Consequences of Nuclear Weapons on December 8th of 2014. The Pope in his message told the conference, the future survival of the human family hinges on moving beyond the ideal of a world without nuclear weapons and ensuring that it becomes a reality. That's the kind of move that the Vatican is undertaking in special initiatives, in diplomatic activity, and also in statements like this from the Pope and those that were issued in 2014. 2015 was an area where a time of history when a couple of things came together that precipitated the Vatican initiating a special statement on nuclear disarmament called Nuclear Disarmament Time for Abolition. The first was the Humanitarian Consequences movement, a movement of non-possessing, that is, states without nuclear weapons, and civil society actors seeking to build a barrier to nuclear weapons through exploring the humanitarian consequences. I'll say more about that. The second was that 2015 was to be the time when the next non-proliferation treaty review would take place, at the time when the world discusses non-proliferation in various kinds of forums. And so in anticipation of that, the Holy See took aim at the December 2014 nuclear weapons and prepared a special statement on the abolition of nuclear weapons. Let me just generally give some background about the Holy See on nuclear abolition. The Vatican has been calling for abolition in general terms for more than 20 years. The U.S. bishops in 1983 in the Harvest of Justice, Song and Peace called for a post-nuclear form of security that would include the abolition of nuclear weapons and call for abolition goal for the United States. In October 2012, the Geneva mission of the Holy See to the United Nations, which sits on the Disarmament Committee, began working on a document to make public arguments for the posture we've been articulating over the past couple of years. Previously, it had explored in smaller meetings of the Humanitarian Consequences Group the possibility of presenting a document on the ethics of nuclear abolition. And so it began to assemble a team that would prepare that document. In 2013, Moreover, the Vatican position took a new turn. Archbishop Dominic Lamberti, then the Vatican Foreign Minister, in addresses both to the International Atomic Energy Commission and then to the United Nations General Assembly, attacked deterrence as a rationale for continued possession of nuclear weapons. He said, the Holy See does not countenance the continuation of nuclear deterrence, since it is evident it is driving the development of nuclear arms, thus preventing nuclear disarmament. It is the military doctrine of deterrence, politically supported by the nuclear weapon states, that must be addressed in order to break the chain of dependence on deterrence. We must emphasize anew that military doctrines based on nuclear arms as instruments of security and defense of an elite group in a show of power and supremacy as the process of nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. The Holy See had several concerns with the present state of nuclear strategy. The first is a lack of forward movement on nuclear disarmament. As you could see from Daryl's charts, there's considerable reduction through the early years of the 90s, but slower reduction since, and no progress towards future disarmament right now. The Vatican was also concerned about the nature of security in the 21st century, with the rise of global terrorism and the instability created by having possessing and non-possessing states over an extended period of time. The Non-Proliferation Treaty was conceived as a bargain between possessing states and non-possessing states. And non-possessing states forswear their right, if you will, to have nuclear weapons in return for the possessing nations making progress towards disarmament. And the result is now that we have a stalemate where nothing is happening, and so the bargain is not being kept. And the Holy See was very worried about the instability in the global political environment because of that. And that leads to an inequality in the non-proliferation regime between the nuclear weapon states and non-proliferation states, or the non-possessing states. I'll say something about that in a minute. And this is very important in the Vatican position, especially concerned about the loss of resources for human development. Holy See, since the Second Vatican Council, has talked about the arms race as a treacherous trap for the poor, and the Lamberti in his addresses talked about the loss of human, financial, material resources in a time of scarcity of funds for health, education, and social services around the world, and in the face of current threats to human security, such as poverty, climate change, terrorism, and transnational crimes. And this coincides, I think we have to understand, with church teaching on a positive peace, that is a peace made up of development and human rights and education and religious liberty. All these things are being attenuated at the same time that nuclear armaments keep robbing from the poor. Following this line of thinking, in November 2014, the early part of 2014, the Holy See held a consultation on disarmament and human needs at the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences with both U.S. and Russian participants. Now, the Vatican document that was a contribution to the December 2014 meeting, A Time for Abolition, makes these points. One, there's been a breach of trust. The NPT commitments to disarmament, non-proliferation, and deterrence have not been realized, and therefore the possessing states are in violation of their treaty commitments. Second, there's been a change in the strategic environment. There are breakout states like North Korea, India, Pakistan. There's illegal proliferation, as there was from Pakistan to Libya, Syria, and North Korea. And there's a rise of global terrorist movements which seek to possess and use nuclear weapons. In the absence of further progress towards complete disarmament, without concrete steps to the more secure and more genuine peace, the nuclear weapons establishment has lost much of its legitimacy, the report said. Another consideration was the humanitarian consequences, and here the Vatican shared a lot of ideas with the consequences movement. It also talked about the illusions of security that nuclear weapons had provided. First of all, that they provided a pretext for war, as in the case of the invasion of Iraq to supposedly disarm it of non-existing weapons of mass destruction. That they had brought the world to the brink of war in the Cuban Missile Crisis, a competition which it turns out brought us much closer to war than we thought, with a nuclear commander wanting to send out nuclear torpedoes against the U.S. embargo and being prevented from it, but nonetheless came very close to doing that. There's the competition between India and Pakistan, which the U.S. has fomented by giving aid to India. It is not protected. Also, nuclear weapons is not protected nuclear states from non-nuclear states, and there's also, as I mentioned, the inequality between the NPT signatories, between possessing and non-possessing states, so that there's an instability where the nations want to break out, as North Korea or Iran or Libya or Syria were trying to break out. There's a vulnerability of non-nuclear states to pressures for nuclear ones. In the case of Libya, Libya had surrendered its weapons to the U.S. with an implicit notion of protection, and then NATO invaded and led to the collapse of the whole country during the Arab Spring. Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons with a pledge from U.S., Britain, and Russia for protection, and then Russia has invaded eastern Ukraine and occupied Crimea. So non-nuclear states can be intimidated and pressured by nuclear ones. And there's greater freedom of action and immunity from accountability for nuclear states. North Korea, Russia, Israel, of the U.S. drone wars versus Al-Qaeda and ISIS, which, for which there was really no accountability in the international community. And finally, the U.S., or rather the Vatican, was concerned about the neglect of the poor and vulnerable as a result of spending on nuclear weapons, something that Daryl has also talked about. So I think my time is up, and with that I'll leave room for questions.